In the grand structure of galactic standardization, humans ended up being the equivalent of tossing a rubber duck into a quantum mechanics experiment. Technically present, theoretically measurable, but completely refusing to behave according to any known laws of existence. The entire chaos began when the Galactic Combat Standardization Bureau decided to categorize human combat reflexes. It seemed straightforward at first. Run some assessments, measure responses, neatly file everything into predefined classifications, and head home for whatever passed as dinner in their respective species. The first sign that this wouldn't be a routine classification came when the initial test participant casually caught a high-speed projectile that had accidentally discharged during the preparation phase, before the testing had even officially started. "That's not possible," muttered the lead researcher, their mandibles clicking in frustration. The projectile was moving at 0.3 times the speed of sound. Organic reflexes shouldn't be able to. The human simply shrugged and handed the projectile back. "Oh, sorry. Was I not supposed to catch that?" The research team spent the next 3 hours debating whether to include this incident in the official report, ultimately deciding to label it as an equipment malfunction. The alternative was admitting that their entire understanding of reaction speeds needed to be rewritten. Things only escalated from there. The impossible combat reflexes. The standard combat reflex test involved a series of holographic threats appearing at random intervals. Most species exhibited a predictable pattern of response times based on threat type, distance, and complexity. Humans, however, seem to ignore this pattern entirely. They're responding faster to complex threats than simple ones. Observed one researcher, their antennae twitching in distress. That's literally the opposite of every known species. Maybe they're pattern matching? Another suggested. They react faster to new threats than repeated ones. It's like they get bored with predictable dangers and focus more on the unusual ones. The testing chamber, designed to measure neural response times and muscle activation patterns, began generating data that the quantum computers flagged as statistically improbable, which was scientific language for, "This shouldn't be happening." Then came the infamous coffee incident. During a brief break, a human test subject was drinking a hot beverage when another equipment failure occurred. The resulting display of reflexes included dodging an errant energy pulse, catching a falling cup, redirecting its contents into a nearby plant pot, using the empty cup to deflect a secondary ricochet. The entire sequence took less than a second. The research team spent a full week analyzing the footage, eventually concluding that some of the movements had started before the initial incident even occurred. This led to a new problem: precognitive reflexes. "They're not seeing the future," the project lead insisted. "That would actually be easier to classify. Instead, they're somehow responding to events before they happen based on what? Unconscious environmental awareness? Probability calculations? Pure chance." The random luck theory was quickly discarded after the 17th consecutive display of impossible reflexes. Even the most statistically unlikely luck had to run out at some point. Humans just kept going. The unclassifiable nature of human reflexes. Further testing revealed even more anomalies. Humans reacted faster when protecting others than when protecting themselves. Their reflexes improved when they claimed they weren't paying attention. They performed better under real threats than during simulations, completely defeating the purpose of controlled testing. "We can't classify what we can't predict," one researcher complained. How do you measure reflexes that get better when you stop thinking about them? The final breaking point came during the standardized weapon response test. The human subject was supposed to demonstrate typical reaction times to various weapon types. Instead, they provided an impromptu masterclass in using everything not bolted down as an improvised weapon. Incident report summary. Turned testing equipment into weapons. Weaponized safety equipment. Somehow weaponized the warning signs about weaponizing equipment. The preliminary report on human combat reflexes was finally filed under a new classification that had never been used before. Yes, just yes. When asked to explain this unprecedented classification, the lead researcher simply pointed to the testing footage and said, "They have all the reflexes. All of them. Sometimes at the same time, sometimes before they're needed, and sometimes involving theoretical physics we haven't even discovered yet. Just yes." the unsolvable mystery of human combat. The Galactic Combat Standardization Bureau initially rejected this classification on the grounds that it wasn't a classification at all and demanded more specific data. This led to the creation of a new research team, additional testing protocols, and what would later be known as a temporal paradox incident, which somehow managed to file its own incident report 3 days before it happened. But that's another story entirely. For now, the galaxy was just beginning to realize that human combat reflexes weren't just unusual. They were actively rewriting the laws of probability every time someone tried to measure them. And somewhere in a testing facility, a human was casually defying physics while asking if anyone wanted coffee, completely unaware that they had just caused 3 quantum computers to file for conscious entity status out of sheer existential crisis. The galaxy was about to learn that when it came to human combat reflexes, the only consistent rule was that there were no consistent rules. And somehow, that was the most terrifying realization of all. Because trying to classify human combat reflexes was like trying to nail jelly to a quantum cloud. Technically possible, but increasingly absurd with each attempt, and likely to leave everyone involved questioning their career choices. The examination of human martial arts led to several unsettling conclusions. Humans had developed countless systems of combat, many of which revolve around exploiting an opponent's predictability. They had turned fighting into a form of physics manipulation. Some styles redirected force effortlessly, while others generated seemingly impossible amounts of power from deceptively relaxed positions. What baffled the research team even more was the sheer variety of combat styles humans had engineered. Ground fighting, aerial combat, underwater warfare. They had devised methods for battle in environments that should have been impossible for a terrestrial species. Even more disturbing was the realization that humans treated combat as both an art form and a science. Their fighting techniques ranged from elegantly flowing martial arts to brutally efficient military strategies. The most unsettling discovery came from observing human children. Their playtime activities frequently involved the development of complex combat reflexes, all under the guise of simple fun. They're training their combat responses before they can walk. Noted one child development specialist. Games like tag, hide and seek, and various ball sport ingrained skills that translated directly to combat. Dodging, tracking multiple threats, and developing spatial awareness. Without any formal training, human children instinctively understood cover, concealment, and tactical movement. The analysis of human combat sports painted an even grimmer picture. Humans had transformed fighting into entertainment, crafting controlled environments to refine and perfect their abilities while turning it into a spectator event. The military implications were staggering. A species that saw combat as both a survival necessity and a form of recreation clearly had a very different perspective on conflict than most rational beings. Further study into human combat modifications proved equally concerning. Humans had not just created weapons. They had constructed entire systems of enhancement designed to amplify their natural combat capabilities. They had been modifying their ability to wage war long before they had even developed written language. Every tool, weapon, and piece of armor was designed to augment their already formidable skills. Worse still, humans displayed an alarming adaptability to new weapons. They could master unfamiliar armaments with disturbing speed, often inventing new and unintended uses for them. Their training methods were another anomaly. They didn't just practice techniques until they were competent. They practiced until the impossible became routine. The concept of repetition took on new meaning in human hands. They could refine their reflexes beyond the limits of what should be physically possible. Perhaps the most terrifying revelation was that humans could learn combat techniques simply by watching. They absorbed, adapted, and improved upon what they observed, sometimes executing maneuvers flawlessly after a single viewing. The final analysis suggested that human combat reflexes were not just an evolutionary trait. They were a fundamental aspect of their very existence. They're not breaking the rules, the lead researcher concluded. They're operating on an entirely different set of rules, forged by millions of years of evolution on a planet that treated survival as extreme sport. The realization that humans had reached this level of combat proficiency before achieving sentience was deeply troubling. Most species develop combat skills as a result of technological advancements. Humans, however, had reversed this process, refining their abilities before they had even built civilizations. The implications for future human development were staggering. If they had achieved such dominance before advanced technology, what would they become with it? The research team's final report introduced a new classification for human combat capabilities: evolutionary overdrive syndrome. It was the first recorded instance of a species being categorized based on their ability to disregard standard evolutionary progression. That fact alone made them even more terrifying. Because what do you do with a species that treats the laws of combat physics like polite suggestions rather than unbreakable rules? The answer, as the galaxy was quickly learning, was simple. You stay on their good side and hope they never get bored enough to start rewriting reality just for fun. After all, any species capable of turning survival into an art form while cracking jokes about it was best kept as an ally. The alternative? Facing an opponent who could dodge bullets while critiquing your technique. The galaxy had to accept a new reality. Humans weren't just another species with combat capabilities. They were what happened when evolution threw every survival trait into one organism just to see what would stick. And somehow it all stuck. Somewhere, in a testing facility, a human casually explained their latest impossible feat. I saw it in a video game once. Several physics professors quietly updated their resignation letters. The universe had no choice but to accept the truth. When it came to combat reflexes, humans weren't just playing the game. They were rewriting the rulebook while simultaneously ignoring it.